Hey screen printers, it's Ryan from Ryonet, and today we're going to show you how to screen print two-color heat transfers. We'll be taking this blank transfer paper and turning it into this two-color print, transferred onto a t-shirt. So first let's talk about heat transfers and why to use them. The way heat transfer works is you're taking a Plastisol ink, you're gelling it to this transfer paper. This is a hot peel paper, which is typically used in heat transfers. There's also called a cold split paper, which we'll discuss in a second. We're taking that, we're gelling it on to this transfer paper so it can release underneath the heat press later, going onto a garment. Now, the advantage to transfers is that you can print a ton of them at once, hundreds of them, keep them for years, and then transfer them whenever you're ready to print. The disadvantage to transfers is that you're taking a transfer, you're gelling the ink, and you're putting that onto a garment. So it's not actually curing into the garment, it's gelling on top of the garment, meaning that they don't last quite as long as a direct screen print. So what are transfers good for? Transfers are good for customers that come back and want lots of shirts, but over an extended period of time. Transfers are great for on-site event printing. Instead of taking this old thing with all the drying equipment, all the inks, all the screens to an event, you can take a simple heat press, pop a transfer down, and be done with it in 10 seconds. Transfers are also great for specialty items like hats, name tags, sleeve prints, anything that you have a lot of little stuff. You can screen print, for instance, names on the back of jerseys or names on the side of, or numbers on the side of your print in like 10 or 15 of them on this one transfer, cut them out and then transfer them so you can essentially accomplish a lot more with less printing. So for screen printing transfers, what you're going to need are 110 to 156 mesh screens. You're going to want a dual edge scoop coater that has a round edge, coating edge, as well as a thin coating edge. You'll want obviously transfer paper and then transfer adhesion powder, and an opaque Plastisol ink will work best. So today we're going to be using Ryopaque inks. We're going to be using Ryonet's premium hot split transfer paper. We're going to be using our transfer adhesion powder and obviously our scoop coater. So in the screen making process, when you're screen printing transfers, you're always wanting to create a little bit thicker stencil because you can lay a little bit more ink down at once. The stencil thickness that you see on screen here is the exact thickness of ink that you lay down onto whatever you're printing, which we'll call your substrate. So instead of using the thin side of the scoop coater, we're going to use the round side of the scoop coater. What that's going to do is it's going to deposit a thicker layer of emulsion on your screen. Now typically you can just get by with a one-in-one coating method, meaning coat the outside of the screen first and the inside of the screen second. You are going to want to use the round side. Typically mesh use for transfers is going to be a little bit lower, 110 to 156. Once again, you want to create a thicker buildup of ink on that transfer paper because you got to have something to release from it to transfer onto the garment. If you print through like a 305 mesh with a thin stencil, you're not going to be having a lot of ink buildup on that transfer paper and not going to be able to transfer it very effectively onto the garment. Likewise, you're going to want to use an opaque ink. So we're going to be using Ryopaque inks, which have a little bit more body to them, once again, giving you a thicker build on the transfer paper. When you create your film positives for transfer printing, you do need to reverse them. So for this two-color design, we have our Underbase, which is going to be white, and then we have our overprint. When we expose this onto screen, typically we would expose this with the positive showing through the screen. So what that means is that as you look through the screen mesh, you would see the S as you would see it on the shirt. With transfer printing, we need to reverse that to do the reverse image of the screen. So basically, if I'm looking at the screen right here, you'll see that what we actually burned in there. I take this and reverse it out. The reason why you reverse it is because it goes reversed on the transfer and then face up onto your t-shirt like this. So two ways to do that. You can hit the mirror button when you're printing out your film, or you can simply just flip your film over and expose it backwards. You do need to make sure that you do that for transfer printing. So once your screen's exposed, we're going to actually be using 156 mesh for this design. We're going to be printing a white underbase, and then we're going to be printing a red overprint. When doing multiple color transfers, what we're going to do first, we're going to preheat or shrink our transfer paper. Now this is the Transfer Premium Transol paper. It's very, very good for heat transfers. We've tested a lot of different types of papers, and this is the only one that we carry right now because all the other ones have had issues during the transfer process. So this is the best, and it's the only one we carry. Now, What we're going to do is we're going to send that through the dryer. What that is doing is it's pre-shrinking the transfer paper, because during the two-color printing process, we have to flash between colors. And if we don't preheat these or shrink these, what that's going to do is when we flash it, it's going to shrivel up the paper and shrink it slightly. And obviously, that will move the design and we'll lose registration. So just run them through your dryer at a standard dry temp. You can speed up the belt speed a little bit, and that will pre-shrink your transfer paper. Once our paper is pre-shrunk, it's now time to align it on press. So what we're doing over here is we're simply aligning the image to the transfer paper, and we're making registration marks. Now, we do not have a vacuum palette for this particular print. However, I've already aligned the image, so I know exactly where this needs to go. So I'll just make slight marks here. If you really want to get into transfer printing, we do recommend getting a vacuum platen, because once again, that keeps the transfer consistent. If you do have a vacuum platen, what you can do is hit the vacuum switch and it will suck the transfer down. You don't have to use any adhesive or anything like that. For this scenario, we now can come and simply align this right here so that we're placing the transfer in the same spot every single time. And obviously, it doesn't have to be extremely perfect, but you want it to get very, very close. Now, once we've got everything lined up, we're going to use a little bit of spray tack. You can also use a vacuum platen if that is what you're doing. A lot of transfer printing, that's what we would recommend, is a vacuum platen. So now that we're lined up, let's talk about the printing process. So multiple color transfers are actually printed in reverse, meaning that the front color is printed first, the back color is printed last. Versus a screen print on a shirt, you would print the underbase first and then the top color second. So on this shirt right here, if this was a transfer, we'd print the blue first and then the white underbase second. Now, there's a couple different ways to print multiple color transfers. The way we're going to show you is a complete underbase method. We're going to be using transfer adhesion powder because we find that that works best. Now, there's a couple different ways you can do it. This way is, once again, the most easiest way and replicable way to do it. However, the other ways you can do it is you can use a transfer additive, or you can also use an adhesion paste that you screen print. The thing about printing Plastisol transfers is you got to have adhesive properties to the ink. There's three ways to do that once again. One is using an adhesion powder, which is very simple and cheap to apply. Second is you have to use an adhesion additive that you actually mix into the ink. A little bit harder, you have to pre-mix ink. You can't just use ink off the shelf. And third is you can actually use an adhesive screen printable glue. So with this particular print, because we're actually doing a white underbase that encompasses the entire print, it's very easy to add the adhesive powder. If the white underbase only encompassed part of the print and we had to flash between the two colors, the adhesive would not stick to the dry or flashed ink. It only sticks to wet ink. So for instance, I'm going to print the red first, I'm going to flash it, and then the white encompasses the entire red design. If the white didn't encompass the entire red design, we have two options. One is we could use a clear underbase, meaning that when we're done with the print, we make a screen that encompasses the entire print. We print a clear ink, wet, and then run it through the transfer adhesion powder. So this will make a lot more sense when I actually get to the adhesion process, but you got to have wet ink on the background of whatever you're printing if you're going to be using the adhesion powder method, which once again is the tried and true method that we would recommend. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about our off contact. When printing on paper, it's a lot different than printing shirts. You want to have good screen tension, so using newer screens, and then probably about an 1/8 inch of off contact, because you got to have that screen mesh pop up and release the ink smoothly on the transfer paper. You also really need to dial in your print pressure and print stroke. If you smash the ink into the transfer paper, it will all smash out your design, smash out your detail. So with this particular design, it does have some crackling effect to it, so it has some detail. We're going to use the Ryonet red ink. We put a little bit of ink in this screen, not a ton, because we don't really need to print a lot of these for this video. And then if you look at my squeegee pressure and angle, I have about a 75-degree angle, 70-degree angle, a little bit lower than maybe printing a shirt, and I'm going to do one print pass. And I want to make sure I'm very consistent and I let my ink release after I'm done printing. So I'm letting that ink release. And as a result, we get our detail transferring through to the design. So if we press too hard, it would smush out and we lose all that detail. Now, the thing about printing transfers is that if I want to print another print right now, I need to dry it. I can't, like a shirt, oh, that doesn't look very good, come print again. You're just going to build up the ink. The ink has nowhere to go on this transfer paper. It stays up on top of it. So that's why you really need to dial in your print pressure and print stroke to allow it to lay up on top of the ink. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flash cure this. We do want to keep the flash cure point as low as possible. If you over cure this ink, it will not release from the transfer paper. So I'm going to keep the flash cure temp 260, 270. So as soon as what I'm looking for is I do not want this ink to come off on my fingers during the flashing process. Okay, I'm using a laser temp gun to temp the ink, and I have a 16 by 16 flash dryer. Now, this 16 by 16 flash dryer is not optimal because with transfer printing, it's very important that you get an even cure. Now this is, even though this is a smaller print, we see that this is giving us different cure points here. So 240, I'm looking to get about 260 range in the center there. So let's see how that worked. And then in production, you'd want to sit there and time this so that when you get flashing, you're looking to get consistent results. So right here, I'm just going to slightly touch it. This is a little wet still. So I actually get a little bit higher than that. So once again, you're going to want to measure this in production so that you know 10-second flash, 8-second flash is going to get me my desired result. It's going to make sure the entire print is dry without over curing the print. You do not want to get this hotter than 280. So now we're fine. Now I always touch the corners here because the corners seem to be the wettest part. So see over here, because this is a smaller flash dryer, this came off a bit over in the corner. So the corner, if we had an 1818 flash dryer, we would dry a little bit more consistently over in that corner. So now we're still wet over there. You really got to dial this in, very important. Now we're fine. For our underbase, we have it slightly choked, about 1 pixel, so we'll see a little bit of red around the edge so the white won't show through on the transfer. Now, if you're using a clear base, you can actually get away with stroking it, which makes your registration job easier. The clear base is a little bit easier than the white underbase because the clear you can't see on the garment. So once again, we would use a clear, in this scenario, we would use a clear base that would print over the entire transfer sheet. And that way the adhesion powder, when we go through that process, will work. But for this scenario, we're going to be using a white underbase, once again flood, and then very consistent print stroke. You don't want to put too much pressure down. And there we go, we have a little bit of red peeking out through the edge. I do need to do a little bit of better job registration on this before we go to print production. So depending on what color of garment we'd be going on, right now this is our test sheet, so I can dial in my registration in a second, and then I'm going to also show you, a couple different print methods as far as getting that down into consistent production form. So what we're doing here is this would be going on like a light color garment. Obviously you can see the red through there. If we're going on a black garment, we'd have to print flash print this underbase. So let's go through the curing process to show how that works. And then we'll do a test, and then we'll reline and go through production. Once again, this is just a test sheet to dial in our curing process. We'll worry about, because like for instance, if that transferred to the shirt, this would actually come off on the shirt. So you wouldn't want to see like this, and obviously we're not in registration. This is our adhesion powder. So we're actually going to take this powder, sprinkle it onto a transfer sheet in an open bin like this. And then we kind of run it through like that, and it will stick to the wet ink once again. Once it's ran through and it has the opportunity to stick to all the wet ink, we take our finger and just quickly tap it, because you don't want to get too much adhesion powder onto the paper, because then the paper itself will stick to your shirt. Now let's go over to the dryer and dial in our curing process. Transfer ink needs to get to 275 degrees to gel cure, so we're going to speed our dryer up. It doesn't have to get to 320 degrees. If it gets too hot, it will not release from the transfer paper. So we sped our belt up, then we're going to test it with a temp gun, and then we'll show you how to test it by peeling off the ink. So Come back over here and we'll temp it on its way out. Should be getting in the 275 to 80 degree range. So this particular print is getting a little bit hot, meaning that this got all the way up to 300. So we'll show you and we'll see if it'll release, but optimally, I'm going to guess we're going to need to speed this belt up a little bit more or lower the dryer belt, lower the dryer temp in order to get that to work. So what you should get as an end result on a transfer is you should be able to take this and peel this off. Now, actually, it is working pretty good. So maybe those laser temp guns don't really work the best all that way. See how it peels off like that? That is a good cure. So I'm going to keep the dryer temp at this temp. I'm going to do it one more time. Now, obviously, when I said this is a test, this is obviously a test. I can't now go and transfer this. So this is a good gel cure. That's what we're looking for there. Now, I'm going to do another test. Just confirm on dryer temp, and then we'll go to production. So once our dryer is set, let's go into actually making some transfers to put onto the shirt. Now, one thing that can happen when printing transfers is that you can have ink buildup because unlike t-shirts that we're receiving, the transfer paper doesn't. So an easy way to fix that if you start to get a blurry image is to take some palette paper or some low adhesive tape and kind of put over your image area. This will especially happen if you have some fine detail in the design. What this does is that takes it all off and cleans it off real nice, like so. So we're going to use some spray tack. Obviously, we do recommend a vacuum palette being a little bit better as far as consistency goes. And then we'll put down our transfer in registration. We've already marked it off accordingly. Make sure it's flat. We're going to do our first color first. Just a real quick flood there. And then remember, you do not want to put a lot of pressure down when you're printing. Just a small amount like that, letting the screen pop back and release. And as you can see, we have a lot of really good fine detail in the design. Remember, we're flashing for a minimal amount of time so that our transfer ink will not release back onto our finger. Also, keep in mind that this will go down drastically as your palettes heat up. So as you start to flash, you need to make sure that you're conscious of your flash times. Looks like we're good to go there. Before we do our second color, we want to make sure that our transfer is cooled down a little bit. You don't want to print directly on hot ink. And once again, we'll do a flood. And then a real quick print like that. And we got a little bit of bleed all the way around the edge, which is good. Looks like we're in registration. Now, for a light garment, we only need to do one white underbase. Versus a dark garment, we're going to do a print flash print on the underbase as well, because obviously you need to do a double thick underbase the same way you would on a shirt. So this will go on a light garment. Let's simply take this over to the adhesion powder and then pop it in the dryer. So in production, obviously you're going to be a little bit closer to dryer, but that's all you need to do. Just run it over like that, do a quick flip, make sure you're getting all that off, and then just run that through your dryer. Now let's do the transfer for the dark garment. So first color. First underbase, flash. So our second flash actually goes a lot quicker. You got to keep that in mind that as your palettes heat up, the flashes go quicker. You do need to make sure that this ink is cooled down. And once again, this is where a vacuum palette really comes into play because vacuum palette's going to actually suck down the transfer paper and it's going to dissipate the heat as well. But it should be cool enough now. Flood. Print, and now we have an opaque transfer. Do the same thing from here, just take it over the transfer adhesion bin, scoop it underneath the paper, roll it on, pat it off, and then into the dryer. Now it comes time for the heat press part, which is actually the easy part. So 330 degrees for about 10 to 12 seconds, medium pressure, meaning you do need to have a good amount of pressure going down on your shirt. Now, the important part is alignment and also making sure that you have a clean transfer surface. So if you had any fingerprints or ink around your transfer paper, definitely cut that out and then properly align your transfer. You don't necessarily have to have a Teflon sheet. If you don't have a Teflon sheet, then you need to make sure that ink doesn't, you don't have any other ink on the garment. But simply align this to the center of the shirt here. This is a 12-second transfer. It is a hot peel, so that means when this thing pops off, we do need to peel the shirt fairly quickly in order for it to release. So peel and then hot peel off. And that worked beautifully. So, as you can see, this is a premium paper. We did split nicely. You only see a very slight amount of ink on that transfer paper, less than 10%. Now the transfer worked beautifully. We got a lot of detail there. Our edge worked perfectly, exactly the way we wanted it to work. It stuck well. It's nice and soft. And then it's centered on the garment, obviously. So we're good to go. This was, once again, the one designed for a light garment, so it only had one white underbase because it's going on a light garment. Now let's show the one designed for a dark garment. Now they make laser systems and T-squares that actually really help with this process as far as aligning the transfer properly. But same process once you get it aligned. Simple 12-second transfer and a hot peel, 325 to 330 degrees. And then we'll just hot peel that right off. Now a couple things here that we did notice. A, the transfer worked okay, but B, if you notice right here, that's going to happen when you do not get rid of all that transfer adhesion powder. Now that will wash out, but if you don't do a really good job of releasing that transfer adhesion powder, that's going to happen. But as you can see here, we have a nice bright white ink on a black garment, so it did work correctly. The most important part of transfer printing is using opaque inks, making sure you have the proper supplies like adhesion powder, which is extremely important, making sure you have good paper to transfer from, and making sure you get your temperatures right. As long as you get those temperatures good and dialed in, you pretty much can't screw it up. So good luck and have fun doing transfer printing. Remember, all the supplies that you saw on this video is available from our website. Check it out below. Good luck and screen print on.